This is a very, very special treat. I'm posting a back and forth debate that I had with a dear, dear friend of mine. He is an Orthodox Jew, and of course I am a Karaite. And so we wanted to have this friendly discussion. His belief is based on, without the Talmud, you cannot understand the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures. And I stand firm that with the Hebrew Scriptures alone, you can understand everything. Now, we very much care for each other, and this was a wonderful back and forth. So what I'm going to do is present his video first, and then immediately after it'll follow my response to all his questions. So I hope you enjoy. Please hit the thumbs up, make sure you're subscribed to my channel, and make sure to hit the notification bell button. That way you can be notified when I go live or when I post a new video. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy.
Shalom. So I'm recording this video as a response to one of my brothers, Peleh Ben Avraham. He posted a video discussing how the Torah is only the Torah and not also a oral tradition or an oral Torah. Me being an Orthodox Jew, I believe that there's a written Torah, and we also have the traditions and the decisions of the judges of the High Court of the Sanhedrin and the Kohanim and the Leviim of previous generations that was compiled in the MISHNA and elucidated in the Talmud. He quoted a few verses discussing how the Torah was only given to Moshe and in a basically written form in the Luchot, but not in a oral tradition or oral fashion. I'm going to quote a few verses just for piquing curiosity of how these verses should be interpreted without some type of legal code that is oral and not just written, meaning that we're not just going by what it says in the written, but we're also going by what potentially could have been handed down from generation to generation over generations. I will note that when I'm speaking as far as oral, I'm speaking as far as least as the decisions that come down from us from Ezra all the way through to the end of the Second Temple period with the rabbis. When I say rabbis, I'm referring to men who were given ordination generation to generation, called smicha. Not just somebody who learns a lot and then becomes rabbi, but these men were given the ruling to be able to give over judgment to Israel. The first verse I wanted to discuss was a verse in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, the 15th chapter. 15:39. It says in English, it shall constitute tzitzit for you, that you may see it and remember all the commandments of Hashem and perform them, and not to explore after your heart, after your eyes would you stray. In verse 37, it says, Hashem said to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and say to them that they shall make themselves tzitzit on their garments throughout the generations, and they shall place upon the tzitzit a thread of techelet. Now, techelet is an interesting thing because everybody who reads this, today's world at least, comes to the conclusion that techelet is something blue. But how do we know that it's blue? A rabbi that I know said that a Messianic couple came to his house and asked him if he wore tzitzit. And the rabbi said, of course. And he showed him his tzitzit, and obviously the rabbi did not have blue in them. And the Messianic man said to him, well, I do. If you look at mine, I have tzitzit. And the rabbi said, but you don't hold by the oral Torah. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, you are showing that you have techelet in your tzitzit, but who told you that they were blue? It doesn't say anything about blue. It says techelet. B'kanaf batil techelet. It doesn't say anything about a blue. Now, my Jewish Bible here says turquoise. A corner thread of turquoise wool, but it doesn't say anything about the color in the actual Hebrew text. So this is a good example of how Chazal, the rabbis of the MISHNA and the Talmud, were able to take a verse that doesn't give you a detailed explanation of how to do the mitzvah, but gives you an idea. You go up a little bit further. Sorry, actually go up before it in verse, 32. It discusses a person who gathered sticks on the Shabbat. It says, the children of Israel were in the wilderness, and they found a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and to Aaron and to the entire assembly. They placed him in custody, and for it had not been clarified what should be done to him. Hashem said to Moshe, the man shall be put to death. The entire assembly shall pelt him with stones outside the camp. Why should he be stoned? There's nowhere in the commandment, in the 10 Commandments, that states that a person can't gather sticks on the Sabbath. But why is he being stoned if there's no oral tradition? Meaning Moses had to go to a God, and God had to give him a commandment to teach him what to do with this person. Go to the book of Vayikra, Leviticus 16:29. This is a verse that me and Peleh have gone over already, just for my own ludication. I think it's pretty good to go over it again. It says, this shall remain for you an eternal decree. This is Leviticus 16:29. Leviticus 16:29. This shall remain for you an eternal decree. In the 7th month, on the 10th of the month, you shall afflict yourselves, and you should not do any work, neither the native nor the proselyte who dwells amongst you. What does it mean to afflict? It doesn't say anything about fasting. But when I asked you, Peleh, what does affliction mean, you gave me various verses from Tanakh that basically come to the conclusion that it's talking about fasting. But where does it say anything about fasting? Where does God give us the leniency or the right to assume that it means something? Now, we have a verse in the Torah that states that you should have judges and that you shall create laws, meaning after the destruction of the temple, we're using the Talmud and we're using the MISHNA as a guidepost dating back all the way to the rulings of Ezra and Nechemyah in their time period. But where does it state that you should fast? Where do you get the right to assume something? And if you have a body of people, a whole 12 tribes, let's say, for example, a whole 12 tribes that are supposed to be keeping these laws, where does it give credence to an individual creating a law for himself or creating an interpretation for himself? Would it not be safer and easier to have a consistent group of people that believe in the same thing? That's a question. Deuteronomy 6:8. Deuteronomy 6:8. Bind them as a sign upon your arm and let them be ornaments between your eyes. What does that mean? What are la'ut al yadecha wa'ut totfot? What is a totfot? What does totfot mean? How do you do this? How do you do this commandment? The idea of a mezuzah. How do you do that commandment? I mean, how do you do mezuzot? What is the mezuzah? We obviously have a tradition that states what the mezuzah is and that it looks like that. Pretty simple what that is, and we have them throughout our homes, and we have them outside on any gates or any doors that lead somewhere. We have them there. But who said that we should have them that way? Obviously, you have the tradition that goes down from Ezra up until now, that this is how it's supposed to be done. Exodus 21, verse 22 to 27. This is a fun one, a very fun one that I thought about over Shabbat, that how do you do this law? 21, verse 22. 21, verse 22. Exodus 21, verse 22. If men shall fight and they collide with a pregnant woman and she miscarries, but there will be no fatality, he shall surely be punished, as the husband of the woman shall cause to be assessed against him, and he shall pay it by order of judges. But if there shall be a fatality, then you shall award life for life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, an hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for burn, a wound for wound, and a bruise for bruise. Now, are we supposed to go around maiming people, cutting their eyes out because I actually hurt somebody? Am I supposed to cut someone's foot or leg off because they did something wrong? Now, Talmud states, the MISHNA states that there are various types of payments that a person gets for doing some kind of damage. There's 5 of them. The actual nezik, the damage, the pain, the healing, loss of employment, and busha, humiliation. Now, a list of various things. How do we assess for damage? If the assailant blinded the victim's eye, cut off his hand, broke his leg, we view the victim as if he were a servant being sold in the shuk. We appraise him how much he is worth and how much he is worth now. That's how one way of doing it. The Gemara asks a question. It says, Ama'ai, Ein tachat ein omar rachamana. Doesn't the merciful one state in the Torah, Hema ein mamash, an eye for an eye, literally. Hence, I would say that he must actually lose an eye. That if someone cuts someone's eye out, he has to lose his eye. Now, the Gemara is going to present the idea from damages of if someone were to inflict pain on an animal, he has to do monetary compensation. They use the same word for damaging of an eye or a limb. Same thing for an animal. They use the same thing, that if a person afflicts some kind of pain on somebody, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth means he has to compensate for the worth, the value of that piece of that eye or leg or whatever it may be. But this is how the Talmud works. It takes a verse that obviously doesn't make so much sense, and it makes sense of it, and it clarifies it, and it gives it a legal status and a legal sense that it makes it applicable to people. Otherwise, you have no clue how to do it, and you'll go around maiming people. Chas v'shalom. Let's see. This one is not so much, but something that I thought to pose a question to. It is in the book of Leviticus, chapter 15, verse 19. 15, verse 19. When a woman has a discharge, her discharge for her blood, her discharge from her flesh being blood, she shall be in her state of separation for a 7-day period. Now, the Gemara discusses that there's different shades of dam, that you have different shades of dam that could make a woman tameh or make her nida. That means that she has to separate from her husband, which has all types of complications that can come about in the home. The rabbis obviously were trying to make sure that a woman's doing it right. They had different shades. I won't go into the shades right now, but how do we know what dam looks like? What color is blood? That's a question. Let's see. General question, the laws of a Nazir. How long should it take? How long does it last? Ramifications if he messes up on the day one. Different situations that may come about his avodah. The book of Numbers 11:16 is another one. Numbers 11 verse 16. Hashem said to Moshe, "Gather to me 70 men from the elders of Israel, with whom you know to be the elders of the people and its officers. Take them to the tent of meeting and have them stand with me." Does this court that is obviously that's in the wilderness and not actually in the state in the land of Israel, but it was given after the Torah was given. I mean, all the commandments were already given to Moses, and here you have him saying to gather these elders, these 70 men. Obviously, Moshe was 71, which is how we have our Beit Din Hagadol, is that it's 71 people, 70 plus Moshe Rabbeinu, or 70 plus the Nasi, the leader of the people. How are we supposed to do this if there is no Sanhedrin, according to some people, that there is no court that decides cases? Which brings me to the book of Deuteronomy. This is where I'll close. It states in the book of Deuteronomy, the 16th chapter, verse 18, Deuteronomy 16, verse 18, "Judges and officers shall you appoint in all your cities, which Hashem your God gives you for your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment," etc. If you go to the 17th chapter, verse 8, it says, "If a matter of judgment is hidden from you between blood and blood, between verdict and verdict, between plague and plague, matters of dispute in your cities, You shall arise and ascend to the place that Hashem your God shall choose. Skipping to verse 10. You shall do according to the word that they will tell you, from the place that Hashem will choose. In this situation, it was in the temple, the section of the hewn stone. You shall be careful to do according to everything that they will teach you, according to the teaching that they will teach you, according to the judgment that they shall do. You shall do. Now, mind you, it says, blood and blood, verdict and verdict, plague and plague, matters of dispute. This means it's covering all basically forms of ritualistic life, daily life. How are we to do these things? My major concern here is not the idea that Moshe Rabbeinu was he given a oral Torah at Sinai. That's not my issue. My issue is that he was given the power at Sinai to invest men and people to judge the people, to give them rulings on how to do the mitzvot. You have commandments that you have no clue how to do. If you go for a job, they're going to give you a book of manuals. Now, obviously it says don't lie. Let's give an example of not lying on the job. Well, what does lying mean? It gets defined. Things get defined. You have the written word that tells you what the surface level is, and then you have explanation. I believe it's in, where is it? It's in, I think it's in Exodus 22, I believe. I forget where it is. I have to look it up. I think it's Exodus 22 where it says that, God gives Moses the Torah and its explanation. What's the explanation? There's no explanation in the Torah itself. I believe it's in Exodus 22. That just came to mind right now. And hopefully I have time to look for this. But whatever. The idea here is that you have these laws, but you don't have a way of codifying them and telling you how to do them. And you have, Baruch Hashem, you have men who are wise enough in times of Ezra and Nechemyah. Why is Ezra called a scribe? What's the power of a scribe? It's not just pinning things down. It's obviously transcribing and making sure there is a centralized concept of what things are to be done in and out of the temple with the children of Israel. You've mentioned before the idea of going to looking into documents from the Samaritans. Well, the Samaritans don't have a pretty good light in the Torah itself, in Tanakh itself. They're not a people that we should be going to. We should be going to our brothers that are given. What do you say? You should go to your brother. You should go to the judge. It says actually, we'll just state the law. We'll state the law. What is it at? The law says, judges and officers shall you appoint in your cities. Judges. A judge has a shofet has to be somebody from one of the 12 tribes of Israel. It can't be an outsider. And last time I checked, the Samaritans were not our brothers. They were actually goyim. So going to them and looking into their documents is basically looking at it like looking at treif. It doesn't really make sense to do that when you have a huge library of codified opinions on how to do the mitzvot. I've asked different Karaites on how they do things, and they send me documents, or they'll say what they do, but in its essence, it is a oral tradition, meaning it was not given to Moses how to do those things. So how do we do these things? One Karaite, I asked him about the laws of Nidah, and it says in this, how are we supposed to do these things if there's no litigation? How are we supposed to do it? My main argument against you is that while I respect you and I respect your opinions, I don't see a clear-cut way of keeping the Torah without some kind of codified document teaching us how to do it. You've emphasized a lot on it coming from Sinai, and that may be a lie of the rabbis, a fallacy, or whatever it may be, but it doesn't take away the genius of the Talmud and what it does for us as Jews. It gives us rules and regulations to keep things forever. One of the first things the Rambam says in his, actually, it's in a different book, in his Sefer HaMitzvot, he discusses that the the ways in which laws are codified. And he says flat out, one of the first things he says, what we're counting the commandments that are in the Torah itself, not counting Hanukkah, Purim, washing our hands, doing the things that are called midrabanan. You have the Karaite, which are in the Torah itself, and you have midrabanan. And I think we have to learn to make sure we're trying to build bridges here and not build trying to separate them. And those are some verses that I want to share with you, and hopefully we can dialogue on those verses and make some connections. Shalom.
Let's begin. The first question that you will see in his video was Numbers chapter 15, verse 37, where he talks about the tzitzit, where Elohim commands that we are to put a strand of blue, tehelet, on the tzitzit. Now, what my brother was arguing was, well, how do we know that tehelet means blue? The answer to this question is not very difficult to answer. The answer that I would give is that, well, all of Israel agreed that it was blue, including rabbinical Jews. So when everyone agrees that it is blue, tehelet is blue, even though he argues that it might not necessarily mean blue, his translation said turquoise, which again, that's a translation issue as well. We can argue about translation things, but in the Hebrew, tehelet, everybody considers this to be blue, and we all understand this to be blue, and everyone agrees that it's blue, including the rabbinics, so I don't really feel like there's any problem with that understanding. Now, rabbinics will counter-argue and say, well, you can't just use any blue, you have to use a specific dye, and I know the argument already that there was a certain shellfish that had a dye of blue that no longer existed. That's why they stopped using the blue in their tzitzit. Now, some people will say that some rabbinics are using the blue again, or they found the shellfish, so on. I would say, look, shellfish is unkosher. So that argument in itself is problematic. We don't use. Why would God command us to use a shellfish, which is unclean, to make the blue? That's my argument to that. Secondly, another argument I heard was, well, how do we know what material to use? It doesn't say in the Torah. And I will counter by saying, well, the Torah does exclaim very clearly, it explains you are not to mix wool and linen. Now, in that instance, it uses very detailed words to say wool and linen. It could have said, you are not to use two materials in your clothing. And you could say, well, what two materials are those? That would have been a great argument for the oral Torah. What two materials? I don't know which ones. But it says wool and linen. Whereas here, it does not tell you which linen to use, nor which dye to use. So therefore, we don't feel that Elohim made it clear and needed for us to understand which sort of clothing or dye was to be used. It's simply a strand of blue. It doesn't mean that we're going to put together, the worst material on earth. Of course, we're going to use quality material to make such a thing. And we would not mix wool and linen, because this has to do with all our clothing, including the tzitzit, we believe, based on the text. We don't play, games with the text. It says, period, the clothing, you must not mix wool and linen. So therefore, that would also include part of the tzitzit as well. Another question, he spoke about in the Torah that somebody was gathering wood, gathering sticks on Shabbat. He said he was placed in custody, which is true, and he was eventually stoned. But there is no commandment, he says, in gathering sticks. So how are we to understand that this was a sin? We would say, well, it says very clearly in the Torah that you are not to work on the seventh day. And he was obviously gathering sticks. In the ancient world, gathering sticks was very different than gathering sticks at a park today. When people gather sticks today, they're not doing it to build a fire unless it's a very rare occasion. They're camping, so on and so forth, which they shouldn't light a fire anyways. The point of the matter is that this person was caught red-handed gathering sticks, which would mean he was trying to build a fire, which was against the Shabbat. Also, he could have been trying to build something other than a fire, possibly. I believe it was for building a fire. The point of the matter is, he was caught red-handed when he was not supposed to be doing this. This is a form of work. on the Shabbat, which he was not supposed to be doing. So therefore, it's not very complicated to understand why he was caught and he was stoned red-handed. Again, it doesn't say in the Torah to not gather sticks, but we understand the Torah itself is 6 days you are to do all your work. He also compares the creation of Elohim working 6 days and resting on the seventh. So therefore, if you want to argue, well, what is melacha? It's very clear that it compares the creation of the Creator doing things and then resting on the seventh day. He used that in comparison to us working for 6 days and resting on the seventh. Next on the questions, he asks and talks about Leviticus chapter 16, verse 29, to afflict your soul. He says, well, how do we know what afflicting your soul is if it's not mentioned in the Torah? He does state, because it's true, that in my videos I show that throughout the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures as a whole, there are many, many, many examples of how to afflict your souls. That you are to mourn, you are to sit in ashes, you are to fast, and so on and so forth. There are many, 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 many examples of what it means to do this. So therefore, his argument is, well, where is it in the Torah itself alone? And we would say, all the people that were given the Torah, the nation of Israel, understood what this means because they were, again, the whole nation received the Torah, and all the nation was explained the Torah very clearly what it meant to, of course, even, for example, another argument that the Rabbinites will use was, how do you know how to slaughter an animal? It says how to slaughter an animal, but not the specifics, so on and so forth. Again, they slaughtered animals in the presence of Moshe. Moshe said very clearly that you were to slit the throat and let the water drain on the ground as water. The focus is draining the blood. And Moshe and Aaron and Yehoshua would have done this physically in the presence of Israel to show them how to do it without the oral Torah, a physical description of how to do it. So for us, it's not so complicated to explain how are we to afflict our souls. Well, when the Torah was given, of course, we're absolutely sure that it was basically understood among Israel based on the physical act of mourning in the presence of all of Israel with Moshe there himself. And it was continued on through the ages before the oral Torah. Next on the list, he talks about the phylacteries, totafot. How do you know how to bind something around your arm? What does that mean? He talks about the phylacteries over the forehead. Now, I have a video on this as well. I'll also put in the description box about phylacteries and all this totafot. And there is much description in the video that I'm going to post about this argument. What we would answer in response to, well, how do you know? What about the Mezuzah on the door? We put Mezuzah. How do you understand this? We basically go throughout the Torah, throughout the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures as a whole. Again, we see many, many, many examples to write the Torah upon your heart, to put the Torah in your inward parts, to bind it in your belly, put it in your belly, place it upon your throat, put it on your tongue, put it on your eyeball. I mean, we consider this very, very understandable to be figurative. Now, Pharisaic Judaism takes this literally, where they literally bind the Torah around their arm and put it upon their foreheads, and that's fine if they want to take it literal. We do not. We take it figurative. Now, there are some who actually follow this and do it just because they want to, and we say, well, I mean, if that's what you choose to do, that's between you and Elohim. We find it very, very clear by the many, many examples. For example, the Pharisees, the Rabbinites, will also argue, well, Daniel prayed 3 times in the window. This obviously proves that the oral Torah was understood by Daniel. He prayed 3 times in the window. We pray 3 times a day, right? That argues for the oral Torah. I would say, well, no, because King David, in the book of Psalms 119, he says very clearly that he prayed 7 times a day. Not 3, 7 times a day. So we have a lot of counter-arguments because we study the entire Hebrew Scriptures as a whole to get our understanding of the whole Hebrew Scriptures and of the prophets to understand how to keep these things. So therefore, it's not very complicated. Again, I will make another video with all the passages and the verses about the counter to the totafot argument of the phylacteries and things like that, if needed. But I will post for that specific question because it is much more detailed than that. I will post a video which will be numbered number 4 video, which will be an add-on to this video. So I will put video 1, which is the one Torah, or 2, which is my first video, then his video. Then I will put number 4, which will be the continuation of this video on the phylacteries and so on and so forth, and other topics. I might post some other videos on the list to understand more. Next on the list, he speaks about in Exodus chapter 21. He speaks about the pregnant woman harmed, life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. He says, well, are you supposed to take that literally since you guys follow only the Torah and you believe it was only written? How do you understand this? Are you supposed to take an eyeball out? Are you supposed to chop someone's arm off? Are you supposed to, again, we use rationale as well. We do not believe in being barbaric just because we take the written Torah alone as the authority and not the oral Torah. Does not mean that we are barbaric and just read everything literal. Again, we don't take, and that's the misconception, is that we take everything literally. We don't consider anything figurative. This is not true. We do not take everything literally, nor do we take everything figuratively. We have to use common sense, rationale, and true, thorough study of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures, as a whole. Again, the Torah alone is not the only scripture that we must read. We have the entire Hebrew Scriptures, so therefore we have to study all through the Hebrew Scriptures carefully to find conclusive and rational biblical arguments on our stance and our understanding of how to keep the commandments, the mitzvot. So we would also agree with the compensation understanding, which he talked about, that the Rabbinites argued that this meant compensation, whether financial or so on and so forth. Now, we don't agree that everything is compensational with finances. It could be something else. For example, if you harm or hurt someone's feelings, you can't give them money. We understand that you have to apologize, make up, and you find example of this in the Torah itself, Tanakh itself, that you are to not mistreat the stranger, not mistreat people. You must treat people with respect and care, and we are required to be holy as Elohim is holy. So therefore, there are a lot of explanations to this. So it's not just compensation to us. It's very clear that, again, thorough study of Tanakh to understand this. Many examples. Another argument that he posts in the video is about Leviticus chapter 15, verse 19. Talks about a woman when it's the time period where she bleeds. How do we know when she's finished? He talks about how the Rabbinites talk about the shades of blood. Then he kind of went off the subject and said, well, we're not going to deal with shades of blood. I'm going to deal with shades of blood because we believe that if Elohim says, as long as she's bleeding, she is unclean, not to touch her, it literally means until she is completely done bleeding. And all of Israel, all of the sects that do not believe in Pharisaic Judaism or Rabbinical Judaism, all agree that it must be completely, thoroughly done. She must not be bleeding in any form of blood, dam, whatsoever. She must be completely clean. That's the answer there. Again, if that's not enough, we can go into greater detail. He also mentions briefly about the laws of the Nazir. How do we understand the laws of the Nazirite? What if he fails in keeping the 7 days of the Nazir? He fails one day. What is to happen to him? For us, it's not very complicated. He obviously failed the mission. So therefore, he would have to, respond, and acknowledge that he did not fulfill. He can't go up there as if he fulfilled. You cannot do that. It's wrong. So therefore, it doesn't count. He has to start over again and go about the process. Again, there's so much more to that argument than meets the eye, but if he failed to keep the 7 days, he did not do what was required according to what is written in the Torah itself. Another question, he talks about judges in general. He speaks about, the Torah speaks about that we have judges to, again, the rabbinical argument is that it does mention judges, and we are to go to the judges in matters of X, Y, and Z, and they consider the judges being the rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, of the ancient world and of today, that we're required in the Torah, that we are to obey them, and so on and so forth. But again, in the Torah itself, it's very, very clear that the Levi'im, the Levites, were the ones who were in charge. They were the great ones to judge the people, as well as it does speak about in the future judges. The Kohanim as well were in charge. The elders, Moshe himself, Aaron, and later Yehoshua when Moshe was passed away. He talks about the Sanhedrin. How do we keep the laws without the Sanhedrin? How do we keep... Now, right now, the Sanhedrin in Israel is run by Orthodox Jews. It's still kind of chaotic over there. But again, he speaks about the Sanhedrin being long ago. There was a Sanhedrin, but what he didn't mention was Sanhedrin was controlled by Sadducees, not Pharisees. The Pharisees did not control the Sanhedrin. The Sadducees did, and they did not follow the oral Torah. So therefore, the only information that we have on the Sadducees themselves are from the Pharisees, which trash the name of the Sadducees. So therefore, their arguments against the Sadducees are very suspect right off the bat. But the bottom line is, they even acknowledge the Sadducees ran the Sanhedrin, the temple, not the Pharisees. So the ones who did not believe in the oral Torah ran the temple, not the other way around. Now what the Pharisees say was that the wrong team was leading the Sanhedrin, and they were in cahoots with Rome, whereas we would argue it's the other way around. It could be argued both ways. The bottom line is the Pharisees did not control the temple. They did not run the Sanhedrin. The Sadducees ran, and every other sect of Israel that rejected the Pharisaical movement. And that was every single sect that existed. Did not agree with the oral Torah. He also asked the question, what is a lie? How do you understand what a lie is if it's not written in the Torah? And I would say that the Torah explains very carefully, very critically, by the way, that you must stand for truth. It says in the Torah that you must not incline after the majority when it comes to justice and truth. Now the Rabbinites, actually in the Talmud, they argue against this. No, you must incline after the majority, the complete opposite of what the Torah says. You must incline to the majority. If the rabbis are together against one rabbi, those rabbis take precedence, right or wrong, over the rabbi who is right. You must incline after the majority. The Torah says the opposite. No, you must not incline after the majority to pervert justice and truth. So therefore, how do we know what a lie is? The Torah is very clear that you must stand up for what is true. That's where it says not to lie. That you must stand for justice and truth, whether you're the lone voice of reason or not. That's what the Torah teaches. So that's my answer to that. Again, some of these answers that I give may not be fully satisfying, but the point of the matter is we have to rationally study very carefully and thoroughly. It's very, very, very easy for someone to say that it's not clear in the Torah. We don't know how to slaughter animals. So for example, they say, well, how do you know how to slaughter an animal? It's not very clear. And we say it's very, very clear. All of Israel understood what slaughtering an animal is. It says very clearly that you are to slice the throat, let the water drain its blood. The focus is draining the blood. Now they will argue and say, well, are you going to just use a dull knife? And we just argue and say, are you kidding me? I mean, really, are we having this argument? Do you really think that an Israelite would purposely use a bad knife to slice an animal? I mean, this kind of thinking just doesn't work. There's many arguments that are used against Karaism and Israelites who reject the oral Torah. They will say, well, how do you do this? And how do you do that? And how do you know how to... It doesn't tell you how to get married. And we say, well, it doesn't tell you how to do a lot of things. It doesn't tell you how to blow your nose. It doesn't tell you how to clean your feet. It doesn't tell you a lot of things. The point of the matter is it tells you what is needed. It doesn't need to tell you how to get married because obviously people knew how to get married. It's not a very complicated case. Divorce is a very, very complicated case. Any Tom, Dick, or Harry can get married in 5 minutes by Elvis Presley in Las Vegas. It's not very complicated to get married, so obviously people knew how to get married. And my opinion is, based on the ancient world evidence that we have, that the marriage of today was not the marriage that was of yesterday in the ancient world. People didn't get married that way, so therefore certificates and rabbinical ordination and so on and so forth, that didn't exist in the ancient world. So therefore all this stuff is modern stuff. Conversions by the state of Israel. Again, this is all modern day stuff. This is not the Israelite way of the ancient world. And I follow true charism. This is not the charism of today, this group sect of KJU that tries to pervert what charism is by mixing and polluting the waters. Real charism, real Israelite faith, is following the scriptures and as it is written. So therefore, there are a lot of questions that can be answered that are placed in our lap. How do you understand the X, Y, and Z? How do you understand this? How do you know what this means? How do you know what that means? Another thing that they will say is that, well, without the vowel points, nobody could even read the Torah. Again, to me, that's ludicrous. Nobody understood how to read the Torah until the vowels came out. That's nonsense. And even rabbinical Jews will understand, if they think clearly, that this is a ridiculous argument. The Torah, when read in the synagogue, is never read with the vowels, ever. The Karaites never needed the vowels. Samaritans never needed the vowels. Every single sect of Israel never needed the vowels until they came out. The vowels are very helpful, but they were not needed to understand the Torah. People were not waiting thousands of years for the vowels to come out to finally read their Torah. They didn't keep it in museums until the vowels came out. This is ridiculous. Last but not least, one of the last arguments that was asked was about the Samaritans. He doesn't believe, based on, again, the rabbinical text, that the Samaritans are legit. Now, we have a lot of evidence that the Samaritans are who they say they are. They believe they are the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. And I know a lot of them personally, and they have a lot of evidence to prove that they truly are of the northern kingdom of Israel, of Ephraim and Manasseh. They also have a museum now in Israel proving their entire history, being in Israel since the time of Moshe himself. They never left Israel when the Jews, our people, were taken out of Israel in 70 AD. They stayed in Israel. So they saw who left, they saw who came back. So to say that they have no say whatsoever, again, the Tanakh does say some disparaging things about Samaritans. The Samaritans have two arguments. They say either these are not religious Samaritans that are being spoken of, which is obvious because they're depicted as heathens and, treacherous. So they say these are not religious Samaritans, or the thing was just made up altogether, which I don't believe. I believe that the first argument or answer is true, that these were not religious Samaritans. The fact of the matter is that they are absolutely Israelites. Also DNA, they also did DNA tests as well to prove that they are of the same bloodline, and a lot of them have Kohen blood as well. So there's a lot of facts behind them considering themselves part of Israel, and specifically Manasseh and Ephraim, which I find very, very interesting. That's just something that maybe you might want to look into a little more. It's very interesting. I'm not using their theology as rule and law, so to speak, because I don't follow their theology. I disagree with a lot of what they say as well. I don't find it rational as well. So that being the case, I just recommend that you look into that a little more. If required, I can make a second video, but this is my response, my friendly response to my brother. Again, forgive me, my brother, if I came off across, this was not to you. This was just in a general explanation. Sometimes I express myself in a certain way, but I have so much respect for you, Nechemyah, and I thank you so much for making your video, and I hope that you'll do a response to my video as well, and we can keep going down the line. Maybe move forward or stick to the script. Maybe this wasn't clear enough and you want to go after the same questions again. We could do that as well. I thank you so much, Nechemyah. I have so much respect for you and your family, your beautiful family, and thank you so much for taking the time to do so. And you know how I feel about you, so I hope that this will get a good response from you. And also, everybody who's watching, his video will be video number 2 in the description box, and in the comment section I'll post his video. Please check out his videos, subscribe to his channel. He is a wonderful brother, very, very knowledgeable. Please check out his YouTube channel and subscribe. He's a dear friend of mine, and I respect him very, very much. And for those of you who are watching for the first time who haven't subscribed yet, I hope you'll do so. Hit the subscribe button, and also hit the bell button on the top right, which will help announce when I make a new video. And if you like this video in particular, please hit the like button, because that'll help a lot of people find this video. Thank you so much for your time. May Elohim bless you. Yehovah, blessed be his name. And to you, my dear brother, thank you so much for taking the time to respond to my video and watching this. And shalom to your entire family, and may Hashem bless you for years to come. Shalom.